My name is Emily Carter. I'm 33 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I stood in the middle of my father's retirement celebration while 200 people laughed at me. They thought I was the family's biggest failure. By the end of that night, they had no idea they were laughing at the one person who had been keeping my father's company alive. If you're wondering how someone can spend years being invisible to the people who are supposed to love them most, stay with me. Because what happened that night wasn't the beginning of my story, it was the moment everything finally came full circle. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers. Expensive suits, designer dresses, champagne flowing without end, and the city's most influential business leaders filled every corner of the room. My father, William Carter, was retiring after nearly 40 years of running Carter Freight Solutions. To everyone there, he was the definition of success. To me, he was the man who had spent half my life making sure I believed I would never become anything. When I stepped inside the ballroom, nobody rushed over to greet me. Nobody smiled. Nobody asked how I had been. It was almost comforting. Some things never changed. My black dress wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. Every piece I wore had been purchased with money I had earned myself. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there because deep down, I knew something important was about to happen. I just didn't know how far my father would go. A hostess checked my name before pointing toward the last table near the service doors. "You're seated over there." Of course I was. Not with family. Not with executives. Not even with distant relatives. The forgotten corner suited me perfectly. As I walked across the room, I noticed my older stepbrother, Jason, laughing beside my father. He wore an expensive tailored suit and carried himself like the company already belonged to him. Maybe it did. After all, everyone had always believed Jason was the future. I was simply the daughter nobody expected anything from. At least, that's the story they'd been telling for years. People often ask whether emotional neglect hurts less than shouting. It doesn't. Silence leaves deeper scars. After my mother died when I was 9, my father buried himself in work. A year later he married Karen, who brought her teenage son into our home. Almost overnight, the house stopped feeling like mine. Jason's achievements filled the walls. Jason's birthday parties became neighborhood events. Jason received encouragement, opportunities, praise. Whenever I accomplished something, it was treated like background noise. Eventually I stopped trying to compete. Not because I couldn't. Because I realized nobody was watching. There was only one exception. My grandmother, Evelyn. Every Sunday afternoon she called without fail. So, she'd ask with a smile I could hear through the phone, "What impossible dream are you chasing this week?" When everyone else overlooked me. She noticed everything. She believed in me long before I believed in myself. Back then, I had no idea how much that faith would someday change my life. The waiter placed a fresh glass of champagne beside me. Across the ballroom, speeches were about to begin. Executives gathered near the stage. Photographers adjusted their cameras. My phone vibrated quietly. One new message. "Nathan, the board approved the proposal this morning. Waiting for your decision." I stared at the screen for a second before locking it again. Nobody in that ballroom knew who Nathan was. Nobody knew the company he worked for. And absolutely nobody knew that one decision from me could completely change the future of my father's business. Not yet. I slipped the phone back into my purse and looked toward the stage. My father was smiling for photographs. Confident. Proud. Untouchable. Watching him reminded me of something my grandmother once whispered only weeks before she passed away. "Emily, some people don't recognize your value until the day they lose access to it." At the time, I thought she was talking about family. Years later, I realized she was talking about much more than that. The lights slowly dimmed. The room became quiet. My father adjusted the microphone as applause echoed through the ballroom. He cleared his throat, smiled at the audience, and began introducing the people who had made his success possible. My heartbeat slowed. For some reason, I already knew my name was coming. And I had a feeling that after tonight, nothing in the Carter family would ever be the same again. The applause rolled through the ballroom as my father adjusted his tie and smiled for the cameras. To everyone else, he looked confident. I knew better. William Carter had always loved being admired. He fed on applause the way some people needed air. Every compliment made him stand a little taller, every spotlight convinced him he was untouchable. I sat quietly at the back of the room, turning my champagne glass slowly between my fingers. No one noticed. That had always been my greatest advantage. If you stay invisible long enough, Grandma Evelyn used to tell me, people eventually show you exactly who they are. She had been right. My father's speech began exactly as everyone expected. He thanked investors. He thanked longtime employees. He thanked business partners who had helped Carter Freight Solutions become one of the region's most respected logistics companies. Each sentence earned another round of applause. Every smile in the room grew wider. Then he invited Karen onto the stage. My wonderful wife, he said warmly. The woman who stood beside me through every challenge. She wiped away perfectly timed tears. The audience loved it. A moment later, Jason joined them. My son, Dad announced proudly. The next CEO of Carter Freight Solutions. Another standing ovation. Jason waved confidently as flashes from dozens of cameras lit the ballroom. He looked like a man who already believed the future belonged to him. Maybe until tonight. It did. Then my father's eyes slowly searched the room. They landed on me. For a split second, our eyes met. Something inside me tightened. Not fear. Recognition. I'd seen that expression before. It was the same look he wore every time he wanted to remind me exactly where I stood. My daughter Emily is here tonight as well. The spotlight swung across the ballroom before stopping directly on me. Every conversation ended instantly. 200 strangers turned toward the forgotten table in the corner. I could almost hear people wondering. Who is she? Dad chuckled into the microphone. Emily has always preferred taking unconventional paths. A few polite laughs. He continued. Some children inherit ambition. He looked toward Jason. And others inherit imagination. More laughter. Jason smirked without even trying to hide it. Karen lowered her eyes, pretending to feel uncomfortable. She never interrupted him. She never had. Dad leaned closer to the microphone. Still, every family needs at least one dreamer. This time the laughter became louder. Not cruel enough to make headlines. Just cruel enough to humiliate someone publicly while pretending it was harmless humor. I slowly stood from my chair. The room became strangely quiet. People expected tears. Maybe anger. Maybe another family argument. Instead, I smiled. Congratulations on your retirement, I said calmly. My voice carried farther than I expected. You've built an impressive career. He nodded, clearly believing I'd accepted my role in the joke. I hope, I continued, your next chapter brings you everything you've earned. For the first time, confusion crossed his face. That wasn't the reaction he expected. I raised my champagne glass slightly. Enjoy your evening. Then I sat back down. Nothing more. No argument. No scene. The audience awkwardly applauded before my father quickly moved on with his speech. But I noticed something interesting. Several executives kept looking toward me instead of him. Curiosity had entered the room. Questions had begun. Sometimes, silence creates more noise than shouting ever could. Dinner was served shortly afterward. I barely touched the food. Instead, I listened. Business executives often forget that waiters aren't the only invisible people in a room. Near the stage, two board members spoke quietly. Our biggest client renewal is still pending. I heard the consulting firm hasn't responded. William looked relaxed, but I noticed him checking his phone every few minutes. Something was bothering him. Across the table, Jason laughed with a group of investors. "We're expanding next year," he bragged. "Everything is already lined up." If only he knew. My phone buzzed again. "Nathan. Everything is ready. Once you approve, legal can move tomorrow morning." I stared at the message. Months ago, I had already prepared every document. Every signature. Every legal review. All that remained was one word from me. I typed only 3 letters. "Wait." Nathan replied almost instantly. "Understood. Your call." I slipped the phone back into my purse. Not yet. There was still something I needed to hear. As dessert arrived, I stepped outside onto the quiet terrace overlooking the golf course. Cool evening air replaced the noise inside. For a few peaceful seconds, I could breathe. "You always run away." Jason's voice broke the silence. I didn't turn around. "I was wondering how long it would take you." He walked beside me, expensive shoes clicking against the stone floor. "You embarrassed Dad." I don't remember interrupting his speech. "You stood up." "So? You made everyone uncomfortable." I smiled faintly. "Interesting." "What is?" "You think my reaction embarrassed him." Jason frowned. "Didn't it?" "No." I looked directly into his eyes. He embarrassed himself. His jaw tightened. "You've always blamed everyone else for your failures." Failures. The word echoed in my mind. Years ago. That word would have crushed me. Tonight. It meant nothing. "You know," Jason continued, "Dad still thinks you'll eventually ask for help." I laughed softly. "Does he?" "He says people like you always come back." I took one slow step closer. "Then your father doesn't know me at all." Jason's confident smile faded just enough for me to notice. For the first time, someone in the Carter family looked uncertain. Inside the ballroom, applause erupted again. Another toast. Another speech. Another celebration. But standing beneath the night sky, I realized something. By tomorrow morning, none of them would be celebrating anything. They just didn't know it yet. The drive back to Boston was almost silent. The city lights disappeared behind me, replaced by dark stretches of highway and the steady rhythm of tires against asphalt. I should have been angry after everything that happened. Instead, I felt strangely calm. For years, I had imagined confronting my father. I pictured arguments, shouting, tears, dramatic speeches that would finally make him understand what he'd done. Reality was different. The truth didn't need volume. It only needed timing. When I reached my apartment just after midnight, I slipped off my heels, placed my purse on the kitchen counter, and stared out at the skyline. My phone lit up almost immediately. 7 missed calls. 3 text messages. All from family. I ignored every one of them. A few seconds later, another message appeared. "Nathan, hope you're okay. Legal team is ready whenever you are." I smiled. Nathan never asked unnecessary questions. He knew enough about my past to understand that tonight had been personal. I replied with 4 words. "Let's meet tomorrow morning." By 8 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting in Meridian Strategic Solutions headquarters overlooking Boston Harbor. The glass conference room reflected the morning sun as employees moved confidently through the office. This place had become everything my childhood home never was. Respect. Opportunity. Trust. Nobody here cared about my family name. They cared about results. Nathan walked in carrying 2 folders. "You look like you actually slept." I did. That's either a very good sign. He placed the folders on the table. Or a very dangerous one. I laughed quietly. Probably both. He opened the first folder. Carter Freight submitted another renewal request last night. They're nervous. They should be. Nathan slid several financial reports across the table. If they lose our logistics software and optimization systems, they'll lose nearly 40% of operational efficiency within months. I studied the charts. Warehouses. Shipping routes. Distribution costs. Every improvement listed on those pages had begun as ideas scribbled in my tiny apartment years earlier. Ideas my father once insisted I wasn't smart enough to have. The irony wasn't lost on me. Nathan folded his hands. So. Decision time. Before answering, my eyes drifted toward the framed photograph sitting on my bookshelf. Grandma Evelyn. She was smiling exactly the way I remembered. Gentle. Confident. Certain. The only person who had never asked me to prove my worth. A memory surfaced. I was 21, working 2 jobs while taking online business classes late at night. I'd called Grandma crying after another 16-hour day. I'm so tired, I'd admitted. I don't know if any of this will ever matter. She'd been quiet for a moment before saying something I never forgot. Success isn't revenge, Emily. Then what is it? I'd asked. Freedom. Those words had carried me through every setback. Every lonely birthday. Every holiday spent working while everyone else celebrated. Every moment I questioned whether leaving home had been the right decision. Nathan interrupted my thoughts. Emily? I looked back at him. I've made my decision. He waited. So have legal prepare the termination notice. He nodded once. No accusations. No. No emotional language. None. Just business. Exactly. He smiled. I had a feeling that's what you'd choose. You know why? Because unlike them. He closed the folder. You've never let emotions make your business decisions. An hour later my office phone rang. Reception. Emily. The receptionist sounded hesitant. There's someone downstairs asking for you. Who? He wouldn't give his name. I walked to my office window. A black luxury sedan sat outside the building. Leaning against it was my father. He had never been to my office before. In fact, as far as I knew, he still didn't realize this building belonged to me. Interesting. I picked up my phone and called reception. Did he identify himself? No. What did he say? He only said he needed to speak with someone named Emily Carter. I smiled to myself. For decades, I had been invisible. Now he was standing outside my company without realizing it. Nathan. He looked up. I think today's about to get interesting. 5 minutes later we watched security cameras from my office. Dad remained in the lobby. Impatient. Checking his watch. Looking around at the employees passing through. He had no idea every person walking by worked for me. Nathan crossed his arms. Do you want to meet him? I thought carefully before answering. No. Really? He came looking for the daughter he ignored. I looked back toward the monitor. He hasn't earned access to the woman I became. Nathan nodded slowly. I'll tell security. No. I stopped him. Be polite. Always. Ask if he has an appointment. Nathan couldn't hide a grin. I already know the answer. A few minutes later, security approached my father. Even without sound, I could tell exactly how the conversation was going. Appointment? No. Scheduled meeting? No. Authorization? No. My father became visibly frustrated. He pointed toward the elevators. The guard calmly shook his head. For the first time in my life, William Carter was being told no by someone he couldn't intimidate. He left 10 minutes later. The moment his car disappeared from view, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Emily. His voice was clipped. Controlled. I know you're in there. I am. So come downstairs. No. A long silence followed. I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot. I almost laughed. The wrong foot? I'd like us to have a conversation. We had one last night. I was joking. No. I replied quietly. You were telling the truth. He exhaled sharply. I didn't come here to argue. Then why did you come? Another pause. Finally, he answered. I need your help. Those 4 words stopped me cold. Not because I believed him. Because in 33 years, they were the first honest words my father had ever spoken to me. And somehow, I knew they had nothing to do with family. Everything to do with business. I need your help. Those words echoed in my mind long after my father stopped speaking. For years, I had imagined hearing him admit he needed me. I thought it would feel like victory. It didn't. It felt empty. I looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. Boston Harbor shimmered under the afternoon sun while employees moved confidently between conference rooms, unaware that the man waiting downstairs had once convinced me I'd never amount to anything. Dad, I said calmly into the phone, if this is about family, I'm not interested. It's not. That answer came too quickly. It's about business. There it was. The truth. I closed my eyes for a second. So you finally know. A long silence followed. You own Meridian. I do. You've owned it this whole time? 4 years. His breathing grew heavier. I didn't believe it when they showed me the paperwork. I imagined that was quite a surprise. Another pause. Then his voice softened. Emily, let's talk. I'll give you 15 minutes. Conference room A overlooked the harbor. I chose it deliberately. Glass walls. Bright light. Nothing hidden. Nathan sat quietly beside me with a legal pad, not to participate but to witness the meeting if necessary. A few moments later, my father walked in. He looked different. Older. Not because of age, but because certainty had left his face. He stopped when he saw the company logo behind me. Meridian Strategic Solutions. Then he looked at me sitting at the head of the table. You really built all this? I did. He slowly took a seat. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Finally, he slid a folder across the table. Our renewal proposal. I didn't touch it. You drove 5 hours to deliver paperwork? No. His shoulders dropped. I came because without Meridian. He struggled to finish the sentence. Our company is in serious trouble. Hearing him admit it should have satisfied me. Instead, I simply nodded. I know. He leaned forward. I made mistakes. Mistakes? With you. I held his gaze. Mistakes are forgetting birthdays. His expression tightened. Mistakes are missing school plays. I continued before he could interrupt. Choosing my stepbrother's future over mine wasn't a mistake. Silence. Telling everyone I had no future wasn't a mistake. He looked away. It was a choice. The room became painfully quiet. For the first time in my life, he had nowhere to hide. I can't change the past, he said quietly. No. But maybe we can fix the future. I almost smiled. Which future? Ours. There is no ours, Dad. His face fell. There hasn't been for a very long time. Nathan quietly stood. I'll give you two some privacy. He left the room, closing the glass door behind him. My father rubbed his hands together nervously. I've spent the last week thinking. So have I. I never realized how much you accomplished. You never tried. His eyes met mine. I was wrong. The words sounded sincere. But sincerity isn't the same as accountability. What exactly were you wrong about? He hesitated. Everything. That's too easy. He frowned. I don't understand. You don't get to apologize with one word after 20 years. I folded my hands. If you want me to believe you've changed, tell me exactly what you're apologizing for. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because for people who spend years rewriting history, the truth is surprisingly difficult to say. After nearly a minute, he finally spoke. I should have paid for your education. Yes. I shouldn't have compared you to Jason. Correct. I shouldn't have embarrassed you. I waited. He stopped again. What else? I asked. Confusion crossed his face. What do you mean? What about making me believe I wasn't enough? His shoulders slumped. What about teaching everyone else to believe it too? His eyes filled with regret. I can't undo that. No. So what happens now? I reached into my briefcase and removed a sealed envelope. This. He stared at it. What's inside? The official termination notice. His face went pale. Emily. Our partnership ends in 30 days. You'll destroy everything I built. I looked at him calmly. No. I slid the envelope across the table. I simply chose not to keep carrying it. He didn't open it. Instead, he stared at me. I finally understand why your grandmother believed in you. The mention of Grandma Evelyn caught me off guard. You spoke to her before she passed? He nodded slowly. She warned me. What did she say? His voice barely rose above a whisper. She told me one day I'd realize I'd invested in the wrong child. Tears threatened to form in my eyes. Not because of him. Because even at the end of her life, Grandma had still tried to save this family. He looked around my office one last time. I've never been more proud of you. The words arrived decades too late. I stood. I appreciate you saying that. Hope flickered across his face. Then I continued. But I didn't spend 20 years building this life so I'd finally earn your approval. His expression collapsed. I built it because I finally learned I never needed it. He slowly rose from his chair. For a moment, it looked like he wanted to hug me. Instead, he simply nodded. I suppose this is goodbye. I walked him to the conference room door. Take care of yourself, Dad. Without another word, he walked through the lobby and disappeared behind the closing glass doors. I watched until his car pulled away. Nathan returned a few seconds later. How do you feel? I looked out across the harbor. Lighter. My phone vibrated. An unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I noticed the voicemail notification appear before the call even ended. It was from someone I hadn't heard from in over 15 years. Jason. And judging by the trembling sound of his voice, whatever he had to say was about to change everything. Jason had never called me first. Not once. Growing up, every conversation between us had started because he wanted something, or because Dad expected him to keep an eye on me. We had never been close. We had simply lived under the same roof. Now his name flashed across my voicemail. I pressed play. His voice was shaky. Emily. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to tell you something. Dad collapsed after leaving your office. He's stable now. The doctors say it wasn't a heart attack, it was stress. He's asking for you. I don't know if you'll come, and honestly, I don't know if you should. But I thought you deserved to know. The message ended. I stared at my phone without moving. Nathan looked at me from across the office. "You don't have to go," he said quietly. "I know. And if you decide not to, that doesn't make you a bad person." He was right. For years I had confused forgiveness with obligation. They weren't the same thing. That evening, I drove to the hospital. Not because guilt pushed me there. Not because I suddenly believed we could become a happy family. I went because I wanted my story to end with peace instead of unanswered questions. William Carter looked smaller than I remembered. The confident executive who had commanded boardrooms for decades now sat alone beside a window, wearing a hospital gown instead of an expensive suit. When he saw me, his eyes filled with emotion. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I wasn't sure either. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I spent my whole career believing success meant building a company." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't realize I was destroying my family while I was doing it." I pulled a chair closer. "You didn't destroy all of it." He looked up. "You couldn't destroy what Grandma Evelyn planted." A faint smile crossed his face. "She always said you were stronger than all of us. She was the reason I survived." He nodded. "I know." He reached into the drawer beside his bed and removed an old photograph. It was faded around the edges. My mother. She was holding my hand in the backyard of our first house. I couldn't remember ever seeing that picture. "I kept this hidden," he admitted. "I couldn't bear looking at it after she died." I gently took the photograph. "You know what she asked me before she passed away?" I looked at him. "She asked me to promise that I'd make sure you always believed in yourself." His voice cracked. And I broke that promise. For the first time in decades. I believed him. Not because he cried. Not because he apologized. Because he finally stopped defending himself. The following week, Carter Freight Solutions officially announced William Carter's permanent retirement. Jason became CEO under difficult circumstances. The company survived, but it had to rebuild without Meridian. As for Meridian Strategic Solutions, we continued to grow. Within a year, we opened a second office in Chicago and welcomed dozens of new clients. Ironically, losing Carter Freight forced us to diversify, making the company stronger than ever. Nathan eventually became Chief Operating Officer. When we celebrated our 10th anniversary as a company, he raised a glass and smiled. "To the woman who proved that quiet determination is louder than any insult." Everyone applauded. This time, I believed I deserved it. A month later, I visited Grandma Evelyn's grave. Fresh flowers rested against the stone. I knelt beside it. "You were right," I whispered. "I didn't need revenge." The wind rustled through the trees. I only needed freedom. For the first time in years, I smiled without pretending. People often ask me whether I forgave my father. The answer surprises them. Yes. But forgiveness didn't reopen the door. It simply allowed me to stop carrying the weight. We spoke occasionally after that. Birthdays. Christmas. The occasional phone call. Nothing more. Healthy distance became our new relationship. Some bridges can be repaired. Others should simply remain standing on opposite sides of the river. And that's okay. Looking back now, I realize the retirement party wasn't the day my father humiliated me. It was the day I stopped believing his version of who I was. For years, I chased validation from people who had already decided they would never give it. The moment I stopped asking for their approval, I became free. If you're listening to my story while wondering whether you'll ever be enough, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago. Your value isn't measured by the loudest voice in the room. It isn't decided by parents who failed to see you. It isn't determined by titles, degrees, or family expectations. Your value is built quietly, through every difficult decision, every setback you survive, every dream you refuse to abandon. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving people wrong. It's reaching a place where you no longer need to. My name is Emily Carter. This isn't the story of how I destroyed my family. It's the story of how I finally stopped letting them destroy me. And that made all the difference.